Awesome. Appreciate it, Ron. Thanks for letting me come and attend in person here. It's always great to be in in-person events as well as supporting the folks remote today. So very nice to meet you. My name's John Weidenhammer. I'm the Senior Solutions Architect over here at Cloudbrink. Cloudbrink was founded to help secure and accelerate remote worker connectivity and productivity. With decades of experience from some of the major remote access solution companies that are out there today to be able to help hybrid workers and even in-office workers really be able to be more productive remotely and more secure. Looking at the room here and everyone on their laptops, how many people in this room trust this hotel and trust this hotel Wi-Fi and the network that you're connected to right now? How many of you think that there isn't a honeypot that's out there that's sitting there collecting all your data and that every bit of what you're typing right now is being recorded, every keystroke? One of the things that Astra just mentioned on her presentation was, the encryption and the ability to make sure that your data is secure anytime you're accessing these, regardless of the network that you're connecting from. With COVID accelerating hybrid work, it became a big struggle for workers to be more productive remotely because of some of the consumer grade network issues that exist out there today. People probably in this room have Google Fiber or Spectrum or Charter, and those are very consumer grade networks that hopefully some of you aren't just leveraging the least equipment that comes from those providers. You run into bottlenecks quite frequently, especially when you have like us kids at home that are on either remote learning or playing Roblox and streaming Netflix and accessing all those other types of applications that compete with bandwidth. So naturally, those consumer grade pieces of hardware are also very susceptible to things like packet loss and latency and jitter, which very much impact the end user experience and those applications that might be business critical to you, like Gen AI, and other private applications that you could access. So this is a little bit different of a topic here, but it's one that's extremely important to businesses. It's one that is often overlooked. The performance of people remotely, the help desks that are out there are actually getting quite inundated with some of these requests and complaints that, hey, this application is performing very slow. And it could be something like VDI. It could be something very important like UCaaS calls and video calls like we're on today. It could be simple web pages and accessing large files. We support a wide range of industries. We have a lot of Fortune 500 and 100 customers that are spanning all different types of industries, from healthcare to financials to media and entertainment. You think of some of the companies that we support, like Doctors Without Borders type organizations that are using Cloudbrink to support video calls and audio calls in remote places across the world, even in Africa and South Sudan. So it's something that has enabled them to, where they previously couldn't do video calls, to be able to hear and see clearly so that they could help diagnose patients and be able to work with different providers to give them better access. Now, we wanted to be able to build this product that it didn't compromise on performance or security. And that's something that in the past 5 years has been a huge issue for a lot of companies that are out there. I'll briefly walk you through just 5 examples where some of the big financial companies, as well as healthcare, as well as some in the government sector, have been exposed and compromised because of weak encryption standards around certificates or your firewall that typically exists at the border perimeter that is misconfigured or has configuration mismanagement issues. There was one just recently in 2019 that had an issue with weak TLS versions, as well as improperly rotated certificates, ones that were expired that then allowed attackers to gain access to the networks and then everything that they wanted to. There was a major software supply chain attack that took place on a large security-focused company that, again, poor certificate rotation and weak encryption was the cause of. There's a big enterprise VPN vulnerability in general for some of the companies that are out there for CVEs. One of the things that Hester mentioned about the automation of CVE patches through Gen AI is something extremely interesting to me. I come from a federal background and security space, and that's one that it was always a struggle and always something to make sure that you're meeting those patching deadlines. But there is some pretty critical ones that are out there today that are being exposed in some of those enterprise grade legacy VPN providers. And there's even one in a very major content delivery network that's still actually being exposed in the mutual TLS side of things, where you think it's that much more secure, but some of the remote certificates were being able to be bypassing that security space. So the solutions of the past that you're used to, that you're probably still using today in some capacity, weren't designed around these problems, right? They weren't designed to be able to solve for these problems. They were actually more of a luxury than anything to be designed at the onset of something like a VPN, right? the people that were actually afforded the opportunity to work from home, they just needed basic access and connectivity into those private networks so that they could do their job, access on-premise Exchange servers, and et cetera. So they weren't designed around the fact that they needed to be more performant, and they wanted to make sure that the security was there. So you're probably used to some of these legacy VPN providers that you have to issue a certificate from your certificate authority to that are very long lived, right? And it's a static certificate that every single device inside of your organization leverages. So there's obviously some key problems with that, right? You're cutting a certificate for a year or three or more that's very long lived, and you're just giving a large window of opportunity for an attacker to be able to get into your network. The other problem is that it is an organization-based certificate. So any user on that network or that is part of that organization, if they compromise that certificate, well, now you can gain access to any device or any piece of the network that you'd want to be able to access. From an architecture perspective, there's also issues here where it's a point-to-point connection between you and a typical gateway, right? And you're going through a firewall that has to have a lot of inbound ports that are open in order to function, which again, those configuration mismanagements often cause an issue. It's another vulnerability that can exist out there. And depending on how your organization is set up from a hybrid workforce, you might have a data center that's based here in Raleigh, but you have users that are connecting from San Jose or anywhere else in the world where that point-to-point latency is going to be extremely high. So Cloudbrink's helped to solve for a lot of these issues by some of our architecture and security and functionality through different means, right? Instead of this long-lived certificate problem that exists in all these solutions today, we manage a global hardened PKI infrastructure that rotates these certificates on a per device basis multiple times daily. So every single device has its own unique certificate that's being validated and rotated on any distant end that it communicates with. So when you access something in any cloud provider or any public-facing website or private cloud that you might host either on-premise or in a cloud VPC, we have a mutual TLS implementation of 1.3 that will validate that source and destination certificate. That rotating piece of our solution here is what's more of an automated moving threat defense capability of networking. It's what's allowing us to make sure that if there is an attacker that's trying to break into that encryption layer and to actually look at that data, it's shifting out from under them so frequently that it's a moving target for them to be able to hit. It's much more difficult. Now, on top of that, right, we are a ZTNA solution, so we are providing least privilege on the network. We do integrate from a table stakes perspective with things like SAML to be able to validate that the user's trusted. We do device-based checking to also validate that the devices that are connecting are coming in at a trusted state. Maybe you want to make sure that they're domain joined, or I see a lot of Macs in the room today, right? If you're a Mac-only shop, you want to make sure that maybe Windows doesn't allow to connect, or iOS or Android devices. You can lock it down so that the device is trusted, the user is trusted, and then only then do you give that least privilege on the network. So that solves for some of those issues, but then we get into the private access side, right? Where you still have these either on-prem data centers that you're giving access to engineers or workers remotely, as well as public cloud VPCs that are private, right? Where you don't have access to those systems otherwise. And especially in a hybrid workforce, this becomes even more relevant because if you have maybe a mix of on-prem and AWS or Azure or GCP, getting access into each of those becomes extremely difficult. So in our case, we've adopted a software-defined perimeter approach to access here. We're not taking your firewall and saying, you need to open all of these inbound ports for able to users to get access to them. We are a deny all by default, and we only connect through outbound connections only. So a lot of organizations actually can get rid of these enterprise-grade firewalls that they put in front of the data center because you don't need all those features and functionality. You can make it very basic of a configuration where you are denying all on the inbound side and then allowing Cloudbrink just to connect outbound. We do basic SWG capabilities with domain filtering to make sure that your users are only accessing protected websites, ones that you have a certain reputation score associated with and trust, so that things like retail or gambling can be blocked and things like that, et cetera. We've also taken it a step further from the firewall and blocked things all the way down to the end user device. So instead of your border perimeter firewall being where attackers sit there and probe, you now have number one, a denial firewall that isn't allowing inbound connections, but you also have on the user side where you are restricting that firewall all the way down to the end user. So if you have a server sitting in AWS or GCP or Azure that you have a user that needs only SSH2 to do development work, you can lock it down to TCP port 22 so that that user can only access that single IP over that port and protocol. Why that's important is that if you have a laptop that's compromised, right? If you're in this room today and you just got the malware that you've now consumed that I put on this network because I wanted to make sure I could see what everyone's saying, uh, I now have access to anything that that remote access solution would, especially in a full tunnel mode where you're sending everything. In this sense, right, you're locking it down so that that malware can't spread across the network and spread to other things inside of your private VPCs or on your on-prem data centers. It's much more secure in that sense because it limits the spread of attacks. Now, the performance side of things is where us as a company is very differentiated, right? We wanted to not just create this awesome solution that is much more secure, but we wanted to do it where it's much more performant because in a hybrid world, that's an extremely important thing for organizations that are trying to be more productive. They want their remote employees to be able to, consume applications like they were in the office or even in the classroom in some cases, right? So what we've done is we've developed an overlay network that we build into an edge, a set of edges that we've deployed across all major cloud providers, all the tier one and tier two providers that are out there today. Most of them are in this room, but including some of the local telcos and fiber providers, companies like Zayo, companies across the globe like Tencent and Singtel that we've been able to deploy our edges on to get much closer to the end users. So the other problem that I talked about from a performance standpoint was that point-to-point connection and that high latency that might exist from you to a gateway somewhere. In our sense, right, we're so dense in this population of edges that are ephemeral in nature that we are anywhere from 5 to 25 milliseconds away from where about 80% of the population sits today. So that initial hop that you get of getting onto Cloudbrink allows us to then ride the backbones of these different providers, give you a personalized SD-WAN experience where on a per session basis, we will route traffic to the fastest path available to you. Now, if you're familiar with traditional SD-WAN products, this is usually done from a hardware perspective, and it's a very static route that you have to configure. I don't see any Meraki or VeloCloud devices sitting on anyone's desk here, right? That's a pain for someone to have to travel with if you're putting that in a backpack and taking that through TSA and they ask, what's this? So in this case, right, we're 100% software and we are dynamically routing across those fastest paths. So it's not like you have to sit there and monitor and say, okay, I have a user that traveled from Japan to the Philippines and now is back in the US. I need to make sure that they're taking the best route possible. We automatically monitor that for loss and latency so that we are always taking the fastest path available. That happens on a per session basis, so that's extremely important to note as well. So if I am right now connected to Zoom, it might connect me through the AWS backbone and network. But if I go and download a file from GCP or I access, something from the Azure network, it will connect me to the fastest path, which could be over a different provider. That's also for high availability, right? We don't want our edge network to be susceptible to DDoS attacks or to go down because someone misconfigured something or had an issue with a cloud provider going down, which does happen from time to time. We are highly available so that we automatically dynamically take that available path that's up for us. So that helps to solve all these problems that we have with different TCP and UDP-based applications. The overlay is agnostic to protocol, so it doesn't matter if you're using SIP for phone calls or if you're on a UCaaS call like Zoom or Teams or any of the other types of apps that are out there on the VDI side, even from a UDP perspective. We're helping to solve for those in a lot of different ways. The overlay that we're building has patented technology that is solving for those last mile and mid-mile issues with packet loss and latency and jitter very easily. Anywhere from 1 to 15% of packet loss is something that we can easily overcome and demonstrate. That is where we're getting the biggest benefits because something like a file transfer, especially if you're dealing with large files, it can greatly help accelerate that time because you don't have to deal with the retransmittal of packets to a distant end, right? You're not waiting for those packets to actually be relayed. In the UDP sense, right, you'll see that little pop-up that occurs during packet loss on Zoom. Your connection is unstable. It will then start to reduce down the quality of the call. You'll see the codecs take over where you'll have less resolution in a video or my presentation here. The bit rate of the audio will be reduced, so I'll sound more robotic. These are things that we help smooth over so that all those types of problems go away. I have a background in VDI, right? I worked at Nutanix for a number of years, dealt with Citrix and Horizon View. And those are workloads extremely susceptible to packet loss, where people tend to go back to physical laptops or desktops because they don't want to deal with the issues that come with either managing them, but more often than not, it's the network that's inhibiting the experience there. So helping to smooth over the network challenges so that even something as expensive and complex as VDI is what helps Cloudbrink drive that value. So there's one thing that I mentioned as well on the multi-cloud side, but that is where if you are a hybrid organization, a lot of products are out there are a point-to-point type of product where you have to click a drop down and select the gateway. In our case, right, we are doing mid-mile NAT translation so that you can connect to multiples of those gateways simultaneously. So you don't have to select a drop down and say, okay, I want to connect to my, GCP VPC or AWS or my on-prem private data center. It simplifies the user experience because you can access all of those types of resources simultaneously. So with that being said, I very much appreciate your time. Would love to answer any questions that you have for me at this point. But if not, thank you for the time and appreciate you letting me be here.